Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Crowdsourcing Sustainability Podcast. Today, we are lucky enough to be with Jamie Beck Alexander. Jamie is the Director of Drawdown Labs, which is the arm of Project Drawdown that's helping corporations to maximize their positive impact on the climate using every lever of influence that they have. Prior to this role, Jamie helped corporations to holistically align their actions with the Paris Agreement and Ceres and a whole host of other stuff that we don't have full time for in an introduction. So, Jamie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, I'm super excited to have you on today because I think you're the perfect person to help paint us a picture on what a company leading on climate actually looks like. And also walk us through the ways that employees can get their employers to actually become these climate leaders. But as always, I would love to start with hearing your climate story, Jamie. So, when did you start caring about climate and why? And could you also, walk us through any sort of aha moments that you've had along the way that kind of stick out?
Yeah. Well, thanks for that question. I think that's a really important one as so many of us are trying to find our way in this movement as it's evolving and becoming central to everything in everyone's lives. So I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, very close to coal mines, and my family worked in steel mills and a very industrial place that I grew up, a very conservative place. And so it wasn't the most obvious, start to being someone concerned about climate change. But I ended up, my first job was actually working in public health for the federal government. And as part of that work, I was living in Bangladesh. And that was in 2008 when even, back then the climate crisis was just so clear back then.
Yeah.
Local people knew it was happening. They knew that things were changing. They knew that the monsoon season was longer and more destructive, and um, it was affecting everything. They knew that the glacier up above them on the Tibetan Plateau was melting and flooding them every year. So that really, I was working on health then, and to see climate change as this underpinning issue that no matter, I just came to this realization that no matter what we did on public health issues or education or all these other things, if we don't address climate change concurrently, none of those other things are really going to matter.
Yeah.
Because for Bangladeshi people, it is an existential, and how fast we move is existential. And then I was also there during in Dhaka, in Bangladesh, during a huge factory collapse. So a lot of companies have outsourced the production of their products to Bangladesh,
Yeah.
and one of those factories, the Rana Plaza, collapsed and killed almost 1,000 Bangladeshi people. And so the combination of that, the climate change awareness, and then the awareness of companies' role in both the social and environmental things, that was my aha moment. That's where I was like, this is something I want to pivot my career and find a way to work on. And it was a long, winding road to eventually find my way into working on climate change. So I can really relate to a lot of people who are trying to find their way into making their own contributions today.
Yeah. Could you tell us just a little bit more about this long, winding road? How did you get from there to where you are?
Yeah, it was. So I left. So I was in the federal government, working on malaria and AIDS work in Southeast Asia and Africa. And I just had this. I was just convinced that I needed to put my full effort towards climate change. So I ended up leaving my job in the government with no plan, and and I just assumed that my skills and what I had done, for that period of time, for that 10 years, would be easily translatable. And it wasn't. It took me a really long time to find my place. And so, I did some like odd, consulting here and there. Ended up working for this amazing um, uh, native-led indigenous cultural revitalization organization in San Francisco that worked on, kind of traditional ecological knowledge and practices. And so that's kind of steeped in my approach now to climate work. And then, yeah, just eventually like kept at it and then found my way into my last role at Ceres, which was very, very focused on climate. But it was a meandering path, I will say. And so I know there's a lot of people who want to contribute to this work, and it shouldn't be that there's only, a handful of opportunities for people to be able to make their contributions. We need everyone.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, let's start to transition into Drawdown here. Could you tell us about Project Drawdown and more specifically Drawdown Labs, just at a high level?
Yeah, so Project Drawdown is a nonprofit that was founded several years ago. You may know us from the book we published called Drawdown back in 2017. And that was really the world's first, and the research effort that led to that book was really the world's first effort to kind of look across all of society and all parts of the world to figure out, okay, what do we know? What do we know addresses? What are the best practices, solutions, technologies that we already have in hand to address the climate crisis? Because until then, it was all about the problem and the challenges and the culprits, and there was not a big focus on solutions. And so so that book really was the first of its kind to like bring all of the solutions in one place. We analyzed them. We put we put dollar figures to them to say, okay, if we really want to meet a 1.5 degrees Celsius or a 2 degrees Celsius world, we need to see X amount of investment in these solutions. And then we also were able to say what level of greenhouse gas emissions reduction that we'll see with as we scale these climate solutions.
Mm-hmm.
So from that, we intended to just kind of be this like clearinghouse essentially of like, here are all these solutions, let's lift them up and let people like do whatever, like take it and apply it to their own contexts. But I think about 2 years ago, we kind of realized things weren't happening quickly enough. And we had a lot of data and a lot of access and a lot of resources at our fingertips because of all of this research that we'd done. So we decided to launch Drawdown Labs, which was really focused on the biggest leverage points that we have in the world today to scale climate solutions. So it was really saying, okay, we need to tap the biggest actors in society who can scale these climate solutions quickly, safely, and equitably. And so for our work right now within Drawdown Labs, that's businesses, especially large corporations, investors, and then philanthropies to try to, with businesses, it's kind of like exploiting their scale and resources for positive climate ends. And then with investors and philanthropies, it's really helping get capital to the climate solutions that we need to get to.
Mm-hmm.
So those are our within the program I run, Drawdown Labs. Those are our three key constituents. So businesses, investors, and philanthropies, and really contextualizing the drawdown solutions and research for those specific use cases.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And so, I mean, I was going to ask you about your theory of change as well. That sounds like it's, very tied to what you just said, but could you make that a bit clearer? I mean, these are the very powerful forces in society, and you want to help them as much as possible to lead on this, but could you extrapolate a little bit?
Yeah, great question. So I don't have a theory of change like neatly tied up in a bow, but I can talk about, I think our theory of change broadly is that by scaling climate solutions, it will make obsolete the things that were not working. That, the things, the ways we used to do things that are incompatible with the future we need. So our focus on scaling climate solutions, it's not saying, it's saying like we need to stop, oil and gas. We need to stop deforestation. Like we need to stop all the things that are not working, and we do that by displacing it with climate solutions.
Hmm.
So that's our theory of change. And then within Drawdown Labs, our theory of change is, for better or worse, corporations have a lot of influence over policy, they have a lot of investments, they have a lot of, resources, supply chain, like they have a lot of tentacles out there in the world. And we need to, for lack of a better word, like exploit that for the climate. And so since we published, our latest kind of publication was a guide called Climate Solutions at Work.
Hmm.
And that, the theory, or I think our evolving theory of change now, and I'm not afraid to say that we're evolving as as the climate crisis accelerates and things change in the world. Like we are every day reevaluating if we're moving fast enough, if our approaches are still working, if
Yeah.
we need to change tactics. So I think our new theory of change is that to move companies fast enough, it requires it requires workers across the business to both push them faster, hold them accountable, and find their own ways to contribute. So I think that's our new theory of change, which isn't like a formal thing, but for me, it's people inside these companies who aren't tied to profit, to like having to respond to investors, or having to, show, their names aren't on the line in terms of like having to show profit or growth year over year. So they can
Hmm.
be like the moral sort of, you know, grounding for a company and hold them accountable, to this crisis. So we're hoping to really empower and, and educate workers across job functions so that they can, do that work.
I love it. You're speaking my language. People power.
Yes.
So you just came out with this awesome report. I read every word of it in the last 2 days. It is wonderful. Can you please walk us through the framework of it and what it means to be a drawdown aligned business? Like, can you kind of paint this picture of where companies are today versus where they need to get to?
Yes, I would love to do that. So maybe, I mean, it might help to start with the, kind of the genesis for this report, for this guide, which was,
Hmm.
um, back in my last job. I worked very closely with the, Amazon employees for climate justice, who were a group of, Amazon employees that started with a very small group who just said, like, why doesn't Amazon have any climate goals, or why aren't we accounting for our emissions? This is crazy. And so they like came together and sort of built power and built their numbers, and I helped them with like, okay, what are all the things that we should be asking for Amazon to do. And so we together came up with this laundry list, not dissimilar from from the framework that is in our latest guide. um, we just like wanted to get out there. Like Amazon has so much influence. It's much more than just their carbon emissions. There's so many other ways that they're influencing the climate crisis. And so we got all those on paper. In the end, the Amazon employees read this list of asks at one of Amazon's shareholder meetings. And then several months later, Amazon came out with their climate pledge, which commits them to net zero emissions by 2040. It doesn't address many of the other asks that we had, but from that experience, I was convinced that employees are the key to like capitalism, if our current economic model is going to succeed, is going to be able to change as quickly as it needs to, it's going to be because of workers, who are demanding it and holding them accountable and helping them get there. Um, so, so the framework that we put out, that's kind of nested within the broader guide that you referenced, is really our effort to say, similar to how the drawdown climate solutions really said, okay, this isn't just about fossil fuels. There are so many other climate solutions, including regenerative agriculture and heat pumps and walkable cities, and there's all of these climate solutions. We can't see it in such a narrow way. Something like climate change affects all sectors and all people. So there's so many different solutions. So similar to that, with this guide, we really wanted to say companies contribute to the climate crisis in more ways than just what they're emitting from their smokestacks. So we wanted to just get it all in one place. So yes, of course, companies need to reduce their emissions as quickly as possible, and not rely on carbon carbon offsets, but absolute reductions. But there's also all these other things they're doing. Like, are they supporting bold climate policy, or are they staying silent, which is essentially is complicit in the status quo if they stay silent? Are they, transparently disclosing their emissions to, to the public, so that people and investors and the general public can make better, can be more sophisticated judges of how companies are doing? Are they investing in, are their investments aligned with their sustainability, their stated sustainability goals? Or are they, through one side of the business supporting fossil fuel companies, while through the other side of the business, they're making these climate statements? Then there's, are there products, are there products enabling like more efficient drilling in the example of the classic example that we always talk about is like, Google several years ago had these bold climate commitments, yet it was uncovered that their technology was actually enabling drilling to happen more efficiently. They've since stopped that practice, or that partnership. But so this framework was really designed to get all of as many, and I think this will grow. This is by no means comprehensive. I think we're going to evolve with this as we learn new things. But it was really an effort to say, this isn't just about direct emissions. There are so many other ways that companies are positively and negatively influencing the climate. And if we can get all of this out there in one place, it brings in a lot more people to help. It brings in a lot more job functions. Because the work of sustainability should not be, it's nonsensical that, the work, this all encompassing challenge, it lives with one small team. Like this challenge, everyone across the business needs to be all hands on deck. So this framework is our attempt at like just opening that wide open and saying like, there's all these other things. There's lots of other ways for other job functions to contribute.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me in All We Can Save. Are you in that?
I didn't know, but we did an event. Catherine Wilkinson, one of the co-authors.
She's awesome.
She is awesome. She was my former colleague at Drawdown, and we actually just launched an All We Can Save Drawdown Labs, kind of an All We Can Save circles guide for people in the workplace. But no, I'm a huge admirer of that book as well.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure, because I read it like a year or two ago, and there's like 50 or 60
amazing women,
awesome people in there. But I was going to say, Leah Stokes in that book talks about spheres of influence, and this I think aligns very well. I mean, I think she was more talking about personally, thinking about your specific spheres of influence and what you can impact, but this is basically companies doing the same thing. It's not just our own operations, which is what is, now kind of like step one, but what else are we impacting? Where else do we have influence? What other levers can we pull on? And that's kind of, I think, what y'all are getting at, which is where we need to be, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really well said. And also, I mean, in Leah's, like, I forget what she calls it, the the
Ripple effect?
ripple, maybe it's the ripple effect. Yeah. Like the innermost ripple is like individual action. And then, what are you doing in your community or your apartment building? And then I would say, what are you doing in your workplace? I mean, I think her piece is relevant both to how our companies, looking at their broader influence, and how our people seeing their role as employees,
Yeah,
as a really important leverage point. Yeah.
definitely a useful framework. So you mentioned there's all these different categories. It's, there's the operations, there's the advocating for stronger climate policies, there's the investment. I think there's like supply chain stuff. There's like 8 of them or something. Do you have any, or like, what are your favorite examples or stories or companies that you can point to that are doing some of these things that are beyond operations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of them, so we have there's one leverage point that's around sort of procurement and how companies are, like most large corporations have lots of partners that help them produce their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so the company Salesforce last year came up with a new framework for how they'll kind of enforce all of their suppliers to align with science-based targets. So basically, they will enforce this. They require that all of their suppliers, every vendor that they work with, essentially has a 1.5 degree Celsius aligned science-based target. So to me, that's a really cool way of exerting your influence as a large corporation, and saying, like, we need to help this happen everywhere and incentivize that. Another one is, I mean, this is a fun example right now, but so business model transformation was one of the leverage points that we identified. And that's really, climate should not be this add-on the side of the business, as, like, this under-resourced team that's, like, incrementally trying to get the company to do less bad over time. Um, as the company is focused on relentless growth, like, there's just something that doesn't really, like, make sense in that math.
Yeah.
So business model transformation is like, how is a company actually centering climate solutions in their business model, and, like, how are they making climate central to their reason for being. And so, I think there's a few exciting examples of this. One is Netflix, who is a partner of ours within Drawdown Labs, but just recently they released so they have been looking at, how do we use our platform to tell better climate stories that will, like, bring more people in through the films that they have on their platform. Um, so, like, yes, they're working on reducing their emissions and their operational emissions, and looking at how they reduce the emissions from people that stream their movies. But they're also looking at how they sort of, like, pivot their business model toward telling more compelling climate stories. And
Mm.
so they just this week, and then publicly on December 24th, are launching this very good, I will say, like, I just watched a few days ago, this great film called Don't Look Up.
You've seen it
Um,
already?
I have seen it. So good. I mean, so good. It's like Meryl Streep and Jonah Hill and Leonardo DiCaprio. And, I mean, it's, Jennifer Lawrence. It's like, and it's so, it's very compelling and deep. And they're going to be doing, a significant shift towards more of that. So I think that, that's really using your business model. Or like, Google, who is, their big climate announcement last year was not just how do we get our data centers to be, on renewable energy, but they want to green the electrical grid everywhere they operate 24 hours a day. And so that's not just helping Google, that's helping like the whole electrical grid decarbonize. And then using their communications infrastructure, their 1 billion users, to help activate their 1 billion users around climate solutions. So those are some examples of like just, going beyond just like thinking in terms of like doing less bad and actually like how can I be part of what we need to do in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm envisioning just like if a company was a person, you like dump out the backpack of everything you got in there and you're like, all right, what can we do with all this stuff to help
Yes.
out?
Yeah. And what is just, what are the things that are just incompatible? Like, I think this is something that I don't see anyone doing yet. Or, I mean, not that I know of, but what what are these companies doing that is just simply not going to work anymore, And like, yes, of course, like fossil fuels is one big one, but a lot of companies are just producing a lot of like random crap in the world. Like,
Yeah.
we don't have time, like we don't have the carbon budget for that. Like, we're going to have to make some hard decisions about, what we actually want or can afford to have in the world. And so I think that there's going to be some hard questions in that regard that I think are going to be coming.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So those are really helpful examples. I'm curious, what is your sense of how many companies actually are looking beyond their operation, like emissions from operations?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say beyond emissions, the next biggest one, or the next few biggest one, of the leverage points that we've identified that companies are starting to align with is, climate disclosures. So there, more and more companies are publicly disclosing their climate impacts, and that's going to be
Mm-hmm.
eventually going to be a mandated thing. So that's happening, and then climate policy advocacy. So we absolutely need to have, I mean, companies, for better or worse, have a say or have influence, on Capitol Hill and in state legislatures,
Just a little bit.
just a little. um, so so I think, and I struggle with this because yes, we need to get like corporate influence out of politics, but while it's there, we need to exploit it to help get climate policy passed.
Yeah.
And so that is happening, and it's like gaining momentum. There was a lot of that, happening around the Build Back Better Act this past, in the fall, which unfortunately hasn't yet been successful. But
Did many companies come around on that? I feel like there was more crickets than I would
I
have
mean,
hoped for.
there was a significant amount of companies that came out and said we support the specific provisions of the Build Back Better Act. We were really hoping to get just companies saying like, we need this whole thing to pass and to be vocal and to be unequivocal. And it was, what we saw was more, companies coming out and saying, oh, we support, a civilian climate corps, or we support the, CEPP, specific aspects of it, kind of cherry picking what they wanted, which some people feel like actually helped the opposition take it down because they were able to like parse it apart and say it
Yeah.
needs to be reduced. But I think there's more. I think there's more kind of momentum in that direction. There's more pressure coming from lots of the great work of lots of great advocacy organizations, like Climate Voice and Ceres, where I came from. There's lots of like great work happening on advocacy organizations who are calling companies out for staying silent,
Yeah.
when that silence is at odds with their climate commitments. Um, but it's not nearly at the level it needs to be. Because I mean, if companies are really serious about their climate commitments, then they would be vocal at every climate policy, because we need those policies in place for companies to be able to meet their climate targets. So to me, if a company has like lofty goals but they're not supporting bold climate policy, then I would question the authenticity of those,
Yeah.
of those commitments. So I use that as I use their advocacy as a barometer for how authentic.
How serious they are. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we have a long way to go on that.
Yes, that makes sense. So transitioning a little bit here, and for all the people listening right now who are employees, what advice do you have for them to actually get their companies to truly lead comprehensively from all these different angles and maximize the positive climate impact they could have? Like, where do they start? What are the most effective steps to take? Any advice would be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think step number one is finding finding your people at work who, I mean, this is lots of people care about this, and lots of people feel like it's not okay to bring up these topics at work, including me. Like in a past job that I had, I was like very anxious about climate change and felt like it wasn't an acceptable thing to
Mm-hmm.
bring up in the workplace. And that wasn't a climate related. I mean, yeah, that's a whole other story. But I think finding your people where you can like build strength in numbers, you can build power, you can be mutually reinforcing. Like, no, this is serious. You're right. Like, we need to we need to act, and some people to um, be your kind of barometer for this is insufficient. Like what our company is doing is insufficient. So I think step number one is sort of finding your people, and that could be like starting with the green team or whatever. If there's affinity groups or employee resource groups around greening the company. I think that's a good place to start. But to really, and then really look at, okay, what are well, let's get down on, and using the framework that you referenced in the Climate Solutions at Work guide, looking at that to say, okay, what can we find out about what our company is doing in each of these areas, and who are the decision makers for these things.
Yeah.
We recommend doing, power mapping, which is, looking at, okay, who are the decision makers? Okay, how do we influence that decision maker? Like, who does that decision maker listen to? What do they care about? Um, how can we influence them to, for
Mm-hmm.
example, support more climate policy, more bolder, be bolder on their support for climate policy. And then, I mean, speaking up at all hands meetings. Like, I worked with the company Uber like several years ago closely with some employees there who were, but this was before Uber had any climate targets, and they were like, "What do we do?" And so we devised this strategy where when their CEO held, his quarterly all hands meeting, we teed up like 15 employees to raise their hands one after another, and every one of them asked, "What are we doing on climate? What are we doing on climate? What are we doing on climate?"
Oh, that is awesome.
And it was amazing. And then like a week later, they joined they joined one of the coalitions out there around like EV, around transitioning their fleet to electric vehicles. And so there are I mean, there are ways. It's just some of those tactics can be risky, though. I mean, they can it require like can be risky and I understand why employees would feel nervous to speak out because there have been examples of people being having negative ramifications of speaking up about climate at work. But I think more and more we're seeing that it's that it's happening everywhere, and companies are gonna lose good employees, and recruitment if they don't.
Right. Right. What would you say to people who are nervous or scared about speaking up about this? Because I've actually had a couple people reach out to me about that specifically. Like, what advice do you have if you're you care about climate, you want to help change the company, but it feels very risky to do anything?
I would say, first there is strength in numbers. So that's why I always say, finding your people first. So it's not just one person that's speaking up, but it's like one after another, and there's strength in that. Um, and then I think there are a lot of examples of really positive, kind of positive organizing that have happened. That it's like being able to demonstrate that, like, hey, this is actually positive for the business. This is what
Hmm.
this is what your consumers want to see. This is what investors want to see. Um, and I think, I mean, then there's, and we're starting to sort of try to build community around this. The Amazon employees that I referenced, the Amazon employees for climate justice, are really passionate about giving more employees the confidence to speak up at work. So I think they're always willing to, like, provide like a space for sharing, and they're like Slack groups, like Climate
Hmm.
Action Tech for the tech sector, and um, different Slack communities that try to bring employees together as well around this stuff, to try to help people, employees, be able to share knowledge and learnings, and have courage to speak up. I think the more it happens, the more it will be, um, the less risky it will become.
Yeah, a little snowball. But yeah, okay, that makes sense. So strength in numbers and creating space so people can have these conversations are two important pieces to that.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it's really hard though. I mean, it's really, really hard.
yeah.
Um, but yeah,
I have
I mean, yeah.
I have another question. Someone coming to mind asked this in the last month or two. And I think the advice will be very similar, but if you have anything that comes to mind to like extrapolate on, that would be great. So this person was in an entry level position, really cares about climate, has some other people in entry level positions at the same company who also want to, you know, get their company moving in the right direction faster. And they're asking, how do you get buy-in from leadership? Like, how do you actually get people at the top of the organization to listen to you, to start taking those actions that need to be taken?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, again, I mean, finding, bringing your like-minded colleagues together to say, um, what are we trying to do here? And using, the drawdown aligned framework as a guide to say, okay, let's approach this from a productive way. How do we help our company get to where it needs to go? Like, we can
Mm-hmm.
help our company see around the corner a little bit and see that there's a lot more room to be innovative and to lead on climate, and to kind of present it as like, we're trying to help you get to where you're going to need to go in the future.
Yeah, opportunity.
Yeah, and I mean, which is absolutely true. And I think, one of the things that our work at Project Drawdown, what we do for leadership within companies, is to say, there's so much like revenue here. You're like, the return on investment of these climate of like investing in climate solutions, of scaling climate solutions versus the business as usual, is astronomical. There's like a 5x, according to our analysis, return on investment, in 10 years of scaling the climate solutions that we've outlined, compared to the business as usual approach. A 5x
Whoa.
ROI. And so it's it is just good business. And so I think the more that employees can kind of frame it as that, and look at how their specific job function can support the CSO. I mean, it's also to say chief sustainability officers are for one, they're on the wrong side of the balance sheet. They're not bringing in any money for the company. So they don't have a lot of money. They often don't have access to the C-suite. They have very few people relatively compared to the like monstrosity of the work on their shoulders.
Yeah.
So it's also about like like have a virtual meeting with like someone on the sustainability team and say like what how like what are the things here that that I can help with. And a lot of times like sustainability officers just don't have the time to engage the rest of the company. So kind of being proactive about that, I think is a good way to start. So like kind
Hmm.
of coming at it from from a productive, supportive angle, and could be while you're concurrently like building your numbers and building your power to eventually like work to hold them accountable.
Hmm. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think that is key, especially at the beginning, is focusing on the opportunities, much like what Drawdown has done, highlighting the solutions, focusing on those, and getting people to step into that, providing a bit of a roadmap. Uh, I'm also curious, just kind of looking at this the other way now. So if you're this chief sustainability officer and underfunded, don't have a big enough staff, how do you tap into all this potential work and help from employees around the company? Do you have any thoughts on how to kind of tap into that energy, that time, that effort, that passion?
Yeah, and I think that's a very live topic right now. I think I'd say historically, and historically meaning like before a year ago, maybe it was like CSOs like I think often felt like, and rightfully so, like this is my domain. This is like I'm an expert at this. I have like my renewable energy person, and I know I have my plan, and I think there was like limited interest and capacity to engage with the rest, like with other employees. It was my general sense, like in very general, broad brush terms. Um, but I think that's, and then and then there would be like green teams who are putting in like doing doing work to help in some smaller way. But I think with with like the Google employee walkout over climate and equity issues, and then the Amazon employees and their organizing, I think that's starting to change where now like CSOs are like, oh wow, if I don't if I don't proactively work to bring in the rest of these other employees who really care, like this could really be bad for the business. So I think there's some examples that I know of where CSOs will like they'll know that employees are organizing and they're gonna like they're sort of building up a strategy to kind of like agitate a little bit, and CSOs will just sort
Hmm.
of like turn the other way and pretend they don't know about it to enable that to happen. So that's one way, and then I think the other way is for the chief sustainability officer to say, okay, great, we have this organized like green team here. Let's figure out like where they fit and how this fits into, or how this can help our sustainability strategy be more ambitious or more
Hmm.
kind of more expansive. So I think that is a very live issue, and I think there's ego involved. Like people are really proud of being the sustainability person and being the person inside the company who's responsible for this huge, this hugely important task. So I think it's like there's also an element to it that's like hard to give up, like to see it be taken up by all parts of the business. We got a little bit of that pushback when we published our guide, but CSO is kind of like, I like it, but like it sort of feels threatening a little bit, which I think probably we need. Like, I think we
Yeah.
need that, but it's hard because we all have our own egos involved in this work of saving the world.
Yeah. But it is all hands on deck.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. I would like to dive into briefly net zero. Do you have thoughts on this and just, what should people understand about it?
Ah, yes, my favorite topic. No.
I have to say real quick, I had Nate Aiden on the other week, and he
Oh,
works at SBTI.
uh-huh.
And I asked him, I haven't even said this to him, but I asked him this question, and his physical response was to like lean back and put his hands on his face as he started talking. I got such a kick out of it.
Amazing. I'd be curious what his response was coming from SBTI, because I feel like we have certainly pissed off some people from SBTI with our criticism of um, of this. Well, I won't get into our. So overall, I would say net as a concept, you know, came from, I think, from the IPCC report back in 2018 that said, as a world, we need to achieve net zero by 2050. Literally an entire planet, every
Yeah.
single part of the planet's operations needs to be net zero, which means that all of the emitting is offset by, is reduced, and the remaining of it is offset by like natural climate, natural carbon sinks, or eventually by direct air capture, things like that.
Hmm.
The problem with that is that companies then took that global target and said, oh, net zero by 2050 as a world, so I'm going to make that my individual company's goal, which makes sense, initially, but there is no world in which all of society is going to achieve, there's no way that every single business on earth is going to achieve net zero by 2050. So it is nonsensical that, a net zero target for a company is a leadership position. The leaders need to be like, way faster than 2040 or 2050. And, net zero, the concept of the net zero enables this weird carbon trading scheme where it enables companies to continue emitting with this promise of some other part of society that's gonna like absorb their remaining greenhouse gases, which we just know is, natural carbon sinks are forests are burning up that we thought were carbon sinks. Like, Nike and Microsoft had parts of their carbon offsets were in a forest in Oregon that went up in flames in the bootleg fire this past summer. So there's no, and there's a limit to what to how much carbon trees and the ocean can absorb
Yeah.
before it stops being a sink. And so in my opinion, it's a very problematic. It's very problematic of a concept that for something that's very, very, very important that we get right. So
Hmm.
I worry that it detracts attention away from the actual reductions that are necessary, and it enables just this like continuing on of business as usual while we pay for some pretty shaky math, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping.
Kind of delaying the emissions reductions that need to be made immediately, and also kind of takes the pressure off of companies to some degree. Like if you're saying you're going to be net zero, but you're not actually doing anything, but people think you're doing stuff, then there's not as much pressure to move faster.
Right. I mean, any company could be net zero tomorrow by just paying for it. Like, you can just
Yeah.
pay to be net zero, and the atmosphere doesn't care about that. I mean, like, and it's way there's way too many questions about the reliability and the permanence of these offsets to be able to bet our whole planet on it, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So the absolute reductions of, there's a lot of there's a lot of low hanging fruit that where we can achieve like quick wins, absolute reductions. The carbon offsets should be reserved for the very, very, very challenging, hard to abate areas. And we're very far from that. We use offsets as a crutch for, for all kinds of emissions that are much easier to actually just reduce.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for diving in. So another thing I wanted to ask you about, I came across an article that you wrote like maybe 5 years ago, and it was how climate action is pro-life. And I was really excited to see that because I've, pondered this thought before. Like pro-life is kind of claimed by a certain group of people right now. And I'm like, climate is the most pro-life thing out there right now. But anyway, could you just like summarize your thoughts on that quickly for folks?
Yeah, I mean, well, one, I was like so stunned when I saw that you had found that article, because that was 2017. I think it feels like a different time, and I didn't know anyone had ever actually read that. So I was like, oh, um, so thank you for finding that. I mean, I come from a very conservative background and part of the country, and so it just always felt so obvious to me. Like, this is a core value of, of the like very conservative, like upbringing, politically conservative upbringing I had. Um, so it just felt like, why are we not, like, how did this become so like politicized, so, so divided, where we can't even see that it's actually our own, values at stake here. So I really wanted to try to, I mean, it was really an effort to try to connect more of like my family and my upbringing with the climate movement.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I feel the same way about like, you know, fishermen and hunters and like people that are much more in tune with nature than I am, certainly. Like I think there's so many ways that we could be connecting with people, and so many different aspects of climate change that speak to so many different kinds of people, that I just feel so sad that somehow, it's gotten so convoluted.
Yeah.
So yeah, that piece was my effort to just try to like connect the, the pro life movement with, like, that is essentially what the climate movement is all about, like preserving life on Earth. And so yeah, I really appreciate you finding that, and I feel like we're further away now
Yeah.
than we were, then, and that's really really hard.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll.
Did did that strike up any conversations for you when you wrote it? Did you like share with anyone in particular who you wanted to get their thoughts on or anything like that?
There was, so that, I mean,
Did you build any bridges?
yeah, a bit. I mean, I think I mean, I came from like a Catholic school and very, just like very pro life. So a few of my friends from, from growing up, I think found it and thought like, oh, this is interesting. I like this. But I think back then I was really nervous to talk about climate change, with, with that part of my life. So, I didn't like, I just kind of like quietly put it out there. But I mean, the more and more that, the climate is, and our weather is changing, I think it's a conversation that I've been able to have, build some more bridges since then,
Yeah.
which I guess is
Nice.
good. Yeah.
Nice. So On top of all this amazing work you're doing, you are a mother. Uh, do you have any advice for parents raising kids at this time? Like, how should they talk about climate, and what can you do as a parent to prepare your kids for this climate changed future?
Yeah, it is something I mean, definitely keeps me awake at night. Um, I mean, I think the thing that I try to just infuse in my own parenting is that I sort of wish I had when I was a kid is a sense that there things are changing. Like our planet is not is not static, and our planet is undergoing massive changes. And I think the more that I try to like intentionally call that out to my kids so that it's just part of it, so that they never even like had a sense that that things were going to be the same in 10 years that they are now.
Yeah.
Like I almost wish that I had had that, because I certainly grew up with the notion that like things would always be like this, that we would
Hmm.
always have, the same weather and this stability. And so I always try to like, I mean, it sucks, but I always say, like when we have 400 AQI, when we have like hazardous air quality from forest fires, like I'm open with my kids about it. I'm like, this is, this is just part of their lives. Like we moved because of wildfires in San Francisco, in the Bay Area. And, I mean, they know that we left our homes and uprooted our lives and moved away because of climate change. So like I don't shelter them from that, because I think it's going to be a part of their lives. And I think for me, my parenting style is just to be real with my kids, so that um, it's not going to be I mean, it's going to be painful. There's going to be a lot of suffering. But so there won't be this like moment where they're like, oh my God, but it's just sort of like part of how they're part of their awareness,
Yeah.
which totally sucks. It totally sucks. But
How old are they, and how are they reacting to these big, hard realities?
yeah, they're 4 and 6. So they're, yeah. um, so yeah. But I think I mean, it's just, I think when you're raised with like something being normal, it's just normal.
Yeah.
Being in and out of school because of a pandemic, like, is just normal to them now. Wearing a mask is just normal. Wearing an N95 during wildfire season in the Bay Area became normal. Not being able to go outside when it's smoky. These things are all just normal to them.
Hmm.
Um, and it's awful. But I think I'd rather, I'd rather like just have them have that awareness than like have it be a big like
Shock.
slap in the face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
World shattering. Wait,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
this is
And then
not
to
what I
just,
thought it was going to be like.
yeah, and then just appreciate like the moments that we have, and just to really appreciate like, wow, this is a beautiful clear air day today. Can you believe it? This is awesome. Let's get outside. And and just like really appreciate I think it does help with gratitude.
Hmm.
Teaching gratitude is for what we still have. Um,
Yeah,
really important.
completely agree with that. Um, so you mentioned you moved because of the wildfires. Can you just briefly tell me what that decision was like?
Yeah. We So one of my kids has some respiratory stuff, and
Hmm.
so yeah, we've been living in the Bay Area for a while, and the 2018 the big campfire happened that like was really caused hazardous air quality in San Francisco for weeks on end. I mean, our smoke alarm was going off inside of our apartment for because of how smoky the air was. And
Wow.
so it was like 3 years in a row that were really, really bad. And and then the pandemic hit, and we had some flexibility with jobs and being remote. Um, so we decided to move, even though, we really love the Bay Area. And then, of course, like we moved, and then the first summer that we were in Minnesota, and there was like this massive fire in the Superior National Forest that caused horrible air quality in Minnesota. So it's just, I think it was the universe's way of saying there is no moving away from climate change.
Mm-hmm.
Nowhere is safe. Everywhere is going to be impacted at different times and different ways, and we need to focus on stopping the cause of climate change, and that's the only way we're going to be able to get out of this, while we
Mm-hmm.
take care of while we protect our communities and work on adaptation. So yeah, it's a big, and I think it's going to be a big story. I think it's going to be a massive movement of people around the world trying to find safety. It's going to be a really big
Yeah.
story. So I think the more we talk about it, the more we talk about what's happening, the better we can like do this in a way that's thoughtful and proactive and addresses inequity and addresses the fact that like we had the means to move and a lot of people don't, and what does that mean? And I think we have a lot of like big conversations to have as a like global human family that
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that I think is going to be much much bigger in the years to come.
Yeah, this is we're getting into the heavy stuff here. This is what actually worries me most. Like how many people are going to be forced to leave their home because it's no longer safe, or it's been destroyed, or they can't grow crops where they've been able to grow crops for however many decades or centuries. Um, what what do you think, in a perfect world, what would we be doing right now to prepare for this? Because in my mind, it sounds drastic to say, but like I think we need massive build out of homes and infrastructure in places that are going to be relatively safer on that spectrum. Um, I don't know how you make that happen right now, but like, what do you think we need to be doing to get ready?
I Yeah, I mean, I think the international community there I think number one, there needs to be just international coordination about this, because
Mm-hmm.
so clearly people in certain parts of the world are going to be feeling this more than others, and now all of a sudden we're feeling it in the US. And I worry that everyone's going to be just like out for themselves and like, how do I keep myself safe? And like, there, like I consider myself a climate migrant, but there are climate refugees who are forced to leave. Like, we weren't forced to leave. We chose to, we had the means to, we had an option. But
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people in the world do not have that option, are starving, are displaced from their homes, are, don't have their livelihoods anymore. So I worry that like now that the wealthier countries are feeling this, like Europe and the US, I worry that like we're all going to be like focused on ourselves. And I think we really need international cooperation on this to say like, how are we going to relocate people who want to be relocated, and how are we going to help people adapt who want to stay where they are? And um, I don't see that happening. And it's very concerning. And I mean, even where we moved in Minnesota, property prices are going way up because it's like a climate refuge city. Like property prices are going up. Inequity, like people who were already struggling, are going to be struggling even more because it's not like a big conversation that we're having as a global,
Mm-hmm.
community. So I think this needs to be at the top of the, well, many, many emergencies at once, but this is a big one, and I think it's going to be just mass migration of people in the coming decade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, I think I've got you for a little less than 10 minutes, so we're going to try to squeeze in a few more
Yeah.
questions here. And we can switch to what do we do about this to some degree, because I want to ask you about accelerators, which they were in the Drawdown Review, which was your previous publication. How do you see or like, I guess just, I would love to hear you explain what they are to people who are unfamiliar, why they matter, and then also, are these basically what you're putting into action in this employee? Every job is a climate job for employees. Is that basically the same stuff that you're looking at, just through the corporate lens specifically? Sorry, there's a few things in there, but take it in whatever direction you'd like.
Yeah, that's a great question. We so the 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 bread and butter of Project Drawdown and our research has always been the climate solutions. Like what are the it's the what are the solutions? They're, you
Mm-hmm.
know, solar panels and wind turbines and regenerative agriculture and intercropping and, you know, heat pumps and all, like, you know, all of the what's. But climate solutions don't scale on their own. They don't scale themselves, right? We need tactics, strategies, what we call accelerators, to scale those solutions in the world, to bring them into the world. So in the drawdown review, as you mentioned, we outlined, what these accelerators might be. A partial list. I'm sure that, you know, there's many more, and it's always evolving. Um, and we're working. This is basically why Drawdown Labs exists. So what? How do we bring climate solutions into the world? So one of them is, in finance. So we need, in our current economic system, we need investment in climate solutions to the tune of, you know, trillions of dollars every year invested in climate solutions that will displace the bad stuff. um, we need we need people employed to with the skills and the know-how to install heat pumps, to, you know, destroy refrigerant leakage, to, you know, like we need people equipped to scale them. We need to build power to, you know, for too long there's been a lot of power on the side of fossil fuel companies and kind of delaying climate action. We need to build more power to, you know, on the climate solutions, side of things. We need to set better goals. Again, coming back to the critique of net zero, we need to, like, not see this in terms of like how do we do less bad by the last possible date. We need to, like, how are we going to, like, build the world that we all want? Like, goals help us, you know, see what we're aiming for and like why we're trying to get there, and help us, like, actually have a vision for what we're trying to achieve. I think we need to do better at that. um, and then, you know, policy, we need policy in place that helps enable all of these things to happen in the world and helps create a level playing field for climate solutions to scale.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some of the accelerators, that the big tactics that we can use to scale climate solutions. And then within Drawdown Labs, we work on the investment front, so helping investors and philanthropies get capital to the right climate solutions at the right time horizons, using the right vehicles. And then we work on the setting better goals, moving beyond net zero, and we work on policy advocacy. So we help, you know, we work with our companies to lobby on behalf of bold climate policy. But I think the human capital, or the, you know, the people aspect of it is the part of, you know, climate solutions at work that we put out, is really how do different job functions relate to these, and how do different job functions within businesses, have a role to play in scaling climate solutions. So that's sort of, you know, my passion, and that's, you know, more of the direction we'll be moving in the year ahead.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Um, okay, last couple of questions here. Do you have a favorite book or books that you recommend or gift to people often?
Great question. I mean, we already mentioned All We Can Save, which is just an incredible creation. Um, I also love Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson, which is like climate fiction, but I think it provides um, this incredible like blueprint for how we could actually do this. So I think that's a fantastic book, and I've gotten a lot of my own ideas about things from that book. Um, I mean, then there's some more radical ones like How to Blow Up a Pipeline, which for
Ooh,
people
is that good?
that are more on the more willing to get more deeply involved in some discrete operations. There's that is good. I mean I yeah I think it makes some compelling points for some new strategies we might need to get to where we need
Mm-hmm.
to go. And yeah, and then there's uh, there is a book called Original Instructions. That's from one of my friends, Melissa Nelson, which is a collection of native teachings about the world and about caring for the world, that I really love. Braiding Sweetgrass, of course, like got very popular during the pandemic, but is a beautiful book about caring for the earth. So those would be my top ones that come to mind right now.
You're going to keep people busy with that list. Awesome. And then, I'll be sharing the link to this report, Climate Solutions at Work, so people can find that in the show notes and stuff. Do you have any like call to action for people or any ways you'd like people to help out with what you're doing, or just, final thoughts, message before we leave?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that this is an emergency moment, and the more that we can all reflect that in our own lives, like, yes, companies, and this is a systemic problem, but I fear that we have moved too far away from individuals do have power, individuals have a role to play. And part of what we're doing at Climate Solutions at Work is like saying you have a role to play in your individual lives and in your work lives, and we have power, we can build power, we can make a difference. And so coming back to my time living in Bangladesh, like, if you have the privilege and the ability to make changes that will reduce your own personal carbon footprint, like, you should do them. I think that is the obligation of every person that has means to do that on behalf of people who don't. So that is something I feel very strongly about, and I fear that we've sort of like moved away from that because we didn't want to like burden people or make people feel guilty. But like, if we have the means, we should do all we can. And and I think we need to act like this is a global emergency, because it is. And the more we
Mm-hmm.
don't act like it, the more we just forget. The more we just kind of fall into complacency. And so I really want us to reflect that urgency in every way that we can, as we work to like cope with all that we're losing and all that we're grieving, and adapt to the changes that are happening, and like do what we can to reduce the emissions that are causing climate change. All of those things we need to now do at one time. So yeah, hope we can do that together as a global human family.
I like that. Global human family. Let's make it happen. All right. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat and for everything that you and the entire team are doing over at Drawdown. And yeah, it was a pleasure chatting.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you so much for the opportunity to chat and for your work. And I'm excited to see what comes next for you. And yeah, hope that your move wherever you choose to move to goes really well.
Thanks, Jamie. Appreciate
Yeah.
it. All right. Take care. Have
You
a
too,
good one.
Ryan. Thanks again.